Welcome to Section 5, Purchasing Research. In our day-to-day purchases, we try as much as possible to maximize value from the little resources we have. We achieve this by going all the miles, for example, in a typical market to search for the right suppliers with the available prices before we make a particular decision to purchase. Organizations also conduct extensive research before they procure to meet their requirements. In this section, we will look at research into purchasing to properly identify the needs of the organization and from which source these needs can be best met. At the end of this section, we should be able to explain the process of purchasing research, explain demand analysis, mention sources of market and supply information, and explain the process involved in conducting site visits. Purchasing research is the systematic study of all relevant factors which may affect the acquisition of goods and services for the purpose of securing current and future requirements in such a way that the competitive position of the company is enhanced. So before organizations embark on this sourcing process, they have to collect data, analyze data, report the data, and the findings they got from analyzing the data in order to make the right purchase decision best fit for the organization. In relation to a particular sourcing exercise or cycle, or for a particular material or category of materials, the focus of purchasing research should focus on these three basic aspects. We have one, the demand analysis, two, the supplier analysis, and three, the supply market analysis. We're going to take them one after the other and briefly explain them. So the first one we have here is the demand analysis. This is when standard procedures such as the Pareto's principle or the Krajcik's positioning matrix are used to ensure that the particular attention is paid to accurate demand forecasting for high value, high usage, high risk materials. So now by using either the Krajcik's positioning matrix or the Pareto's 80-20 rule, we're able to know which items to pay more attention to, which items require more resources than the other, which item add high value to our profit margin than the other, which items have high risk, which items are hard to come by, which supplies have perfect substitutes and which ones do not, what can we do to improve on a particular requirement or a supplier should in case they are not available at the time we need. It is only when we are able to categorize our materials into these sections that we are able to focus our resources on the right purchasing research, which will give us the right answers we need at a particular point in time, right? Then secondly, we have the supplier analysis. This is when the buying organization evaluates the performance of the current suppliers, as well as identifying, appraising, and pre-qualifying potential suppliers who the organization is not currently using, to know which suppliers to continue doing business with, to know which new suppliers are on board who can produce us better value or generate us better value, which suppliers we should stop doing businesses with, which suppliers we should renew our contracts with, and all that. Finally, we have the supply market analysis. This is when the organization appraises general market conditions in relation to factors such as likely availability and the risk of shortages or disruptions, the current market prices, price fluctuations and trends, and environmental factors affecting the supply or demand of our requirements. So these are the three basic aspects our purchasing research should focus on. The demand analysis, which is used in order to ensure we forecast our demands accurately, which will feed into the production or the units, the quantity we buy against the quantity that will be demanded by consumers, right? Also, we have the supplier analysis, where we evaluate the performance of our current suppliers as well as identify and pre-qualify potential suppliers that we can work with. Then finally, the supply market analysis, where we appraise general market conditions that affect supply and demand of our materials or requirements. Sources of market and supplier information. In conducting research, one key thing we need is data. Organizations cannot do anything without data. However, we can't just wake up and collect data from anywhere and anyone. We need to know the kind of research we are conducting and then the right people to provide us with the data, the right data that we need in order to conduct a successful research. So here we're going to look at some sources of market and supplier information. We have the primary and secondary. So data is grouped into two, the primary data and the secondary source of data. So first, the primary data are data collected especially for a particular purpose directly from the relevant source, whoever that may be. Example, customers, supply chain partners, or industry analysts. Any data which has been generated by the researcher himself or herself, so any data that the buying organization generates herself is referred to as primary data. And we can collect such data through the use of surveys, interviews, experiments, questionnaires, observations, and so on. So unlike primary data, which are data collected by the researcher themselves for the purpose of the particular research you're trying to conduct, secondary data are data which are already gathered and assembled for other purposes, general reference or publications. Or simply put, any data that is collected by someone other than the primary user. So for instance, the World Bank has their data bank where every year they collect some data and update their bank, right? That's an example of a secondary data. It's not the organization that collected that data, it's collected by someone else other than we, the organization. However, we may need that data in conducting our research. So just go online, get the data, and then come and analyze and make decisions with them. Some sources of primary data, that is data the buying organization collects themselves, will include communication with the suppliers, the buyer's database of suppliers and market data, data we collect at trade fairs, exhibitions, conferences, informal networking and information exchange with our colleagues and other purchasing professionals like suppliers and then other stakeholders. Some sources of secondary data will include websites, which includes business directories and listings and searchable databases, right? We also have the published listings of suppliers and stock lists. We have the financial and trade industry press. We also have the published economic indices, published statistical surveys, the pre-listing and price comparison websites, and a whole other sources where we can get secondary data which the buying organization did not collect themselves, but has been collected by third-party organizations for a different purpose. Move on to the third-party research organizations. An alternative to using either primary or secondary data would be to buy reports prepared by third parties. There are some very specialist areas of research that most organizations will not have the necessary knowledge and experience to conduct effectively and cost effectively. In such instances, we employ the services of third-party research organizations who are expertise in conducting such research for us. Conducting site visits. Site visits is when the buying organization visits the site of their suppliers in order to evaluate the suppliers' infrastructure, their capacity, their capability, methods they use, the quality systems and culture, and so on. Buying organizations can collect vital data when they visit their supplier site. Through site visits, the organization can determine if the new or existing supplier has the necessary leadership, the organizational structure, and operational processes or controls in place in order to meet their organization's requirements. We can't always take the words of our suppliers. We sometimes have to visit their sites in order to be ensured that the suppliers are able to meet our or deliver against our contract. With site visits, we realize that with the few hours or minutes we spend on the supplier site, we can gain considerable amounts of information and gather data. Because the requests for quotations or tenders or whatever are filled by the suppliers themselves, the buying organization should bear in mind that these documents are subject to bias and possible economies of truth as they are part of the supplier sales pitch, as much as they are part of the buying organization's selection process, which necessitates that once in a while we visit their sites to be sure that whatever they are providing a document, whatever they are telling us, is what is actually happening on their site. If they are promising us that they are not using child labor, we go to the site to indeed confirm for ourselves that they are not using child labor. Visits to supplier sites can and should be made at all phases throughout the procurement processes, in particular for complex and non-routine categories or for our critical items as said in the Crowdgeek's positioning portfolio metrics. In summary, we have looked at what entails purchasing research. We also highlighted on the three basic aspects of purchasing research, which namely demand analysis, the supply analysis, and the supply market analysis. We also emphasized on some factors that determine the size of the requirement to be sourced. Again, we looked into the sources of market and supply information, which includes both primary and secondary data. We also looked at third-party research organizations and their use. And finally, we looked at some importance of conducting site visits to our suppliers. Thank you.